when I look at this prophecy and I compare it to events that we know it from Ezekiel's time to today, I can safely say that the only time in our history, in Jewish history, that this prophecy has been fulfilled is today.
Well, welcome to the podcast today. And my name is Jeff. I'll be your host. Our guest today is a returning guest. Sondra Baras is the director of CFOIC Heartland's Israel office. Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, Heartland, is the only Christian organization to focus exclusively on the communities of the heartland of biblical Israel. She lives in a small Sumerian town called Karnei Shomron. We have visited with her in her home. And Sondra, it's great to have you back.
It's great to be back.
Well, we appreciate you taking this time. And today's podcast is a continuation of our prophetic series focused on Bible prophecies that have come to pass through the nation of Israel. And today we're focusing on a very interesting prophecy that's directed toward the mountains of Israel. And I'm just going to read the scripture from Ezekiel 36, 8 through 12. And here is what it says. It says, "But you, O mountains of Israel, will produce branches and fruit for my people Israel, for they will soon come home. I am concerned for you and will look on you with favor. You will be plowed and sown, and I will multiply the number of people upon you, even the whole house of Israel. The towns will be inhabited and the ruins rebuilt, and I will increase the number of men and animals upon you, and they will be fruitful and become numerous. I will settle people on you as in the past, and will make you prosper more than before. And then you will know that I am the Lord. I will cause people, my people Israel, to walk upon you, and they will possess you, and you will be their inheritance. You will never again deprive them of their children." And that text, that prophecy, is a very intriguing one, because God is speaking to land, essentially, to the mountains. Sondra, do we know roughly when this prophecy would have been given?
Well, if we assume that the book of Ezekiel is in order, okay, Ezekiel begins with him. He's already in Babylon. And if we refer back to in the book of Kings and Second Kings, when it starts telling the story of the final days of the kingdom of Judah, there is an initial exile that takes place 11 years before the final destruction of the temple. And Ezekiel is one of those people who is exiled to Babylon at that time. He's sitting in Babylon, and so the beginning of his prophecies, there's still a Jerusalem functioning. There is still a temple functioning. And he is giving his prophecies to the Jews who have already come to Babylon. But beginning already in chapter 24, towards the end of chapter 24, Ezekiel gets word from Jerusalem. There is a refugee, if you will, who comes to Babylon and gives him word that Jerusalem has been destroyed and the temple has been destroyed. And so from that chapter on, we can assume that Ezekiel is giving prophecies, keeping in mind, this idea of don't forget, the first temple, this is the first time the temple has been destroyed. It's a cataclysmic event. The fact that the temple is destroyed, the fact that after that, almost all the Jews are exiled to Babylon. And so he is prophesying after that event. And so what you have here in these chapters is prophecies that, if you will, kind of are trying to cheer people up. Okay? Yes, it is terrible now, but there will come a time when things will improve. And so I think, first of all, you have to see this prophecy in that context. And secondly, when and this is perhaps what's most important about this, he is prophesying to the mountains of Israel. Now, the mountains of Israel go through the middle of the country, and they start in the Galilee, and they go all the way down through the Negev, okay? But a very large part of those mountains of Israel are in Samaria. Now, during Ezekiel's time, Samaria for already 120 years has been destroyed and has not, the original tribes that lived there have been gone. They've just been dispersed. These are the people that we often refer to as the 10 lost tribes. That already happened more than 100 years earlier. So when he's prophesying to the mountains of Israel, and he is, I believe, including all those mountains of Israel, he's also saying something very unique in that I'm not just prophesying to Judah, I'm prophesying to the whole land of Israel, if you will.
Right. And so you helped clarify for us there. I sort of let the cat out of the bag a little bit, but the person speaking in the passage is God, and God is speaking
Right.
to the mountains themselves. The mountains are
Right.
essentially the audience. The land is the
Right.
audience who's supposed to be hearing God's words. So how do you interpret then this prophetic verse? What's the vision here? What is God saying exactly?
Okay, so it's a prophecy of restoration, and the land itself reflects what has happened to the people. And if you imagine where Ezekiel is, and there's no question he's bringing forth the word of God, but he's in this too. In other words, very often the prophets themselves bring their own passion, sometimes even their own vocabulary, in transmitting the message of God to the nation or to whoever he's talking, in this case the mountains. But that the context is always very important. And so you're in a situation now where Ezekiel is in Babylon, but he's imagining that the land of Israel is now empty or nearly empty. Okay, there's a process of exile. So what does that mean for the land? The land where there were many Jews living is now empty of Jews. And so when he is now prophesying to the mountains of Israel, he is saying, right now, you're in a situation where you are empty. And it refers to the ruined cities being rebuilt. But what that means is that there are ruined cities. So he is looking at a situation where the mountains of Israel is at their worst. And again, some of these mountains have already been in the state of neglect and absence of Jewish cities and Jewish population for more than 100 years. But the rest of it, the part that's Judea, has been like this just for days, weeks, a very short time. But this is the situation. So what he is now saying is that there will be a reversal. Right now, you have ruined cities. Right now, you have no people. Right now, and I love this verse also, when he says, it talks about the trees, the branches of the trees, the trees will like kind of shoot forth their branches and bear fruit. So again, if you're trying to picture what he's seeing now tree stumps. He's seeing trees that have been cut down without the branches, trunks or maybe a couple branches, stumps of trees. And so or barren trees that have not borne fruit in quite some time. And so he is picturing a complete reversal of that, where these trees start to grow again and have beautiful branches and fruit. And with that same idea, the mountains that were empty of people, now the people come back. The ruins will be rebuilt, and they will again be cities that will be inhabited by the people of Israel. So this is the picture he's painting. And of course, the question is, when will that happen? And,
right.
As Ezekiel is putting forth this word, God does not reveal to him when it will happen. He just says it will happen. But if I look, and it's very possible, look, Jeremiah, who is a contemporary of Ezekiel, okay, Jeremiah prophesies probably around the same time, okay, that it will be 70 years. So, but this is a very different prophecy. Jeremiah prophesies to be 70 years, they'll return to Jerusalem. Here, he's talking about a whole different picture, the mountains of Israel. Now, it's possible that in Ezekiel's mind, he's saying, well, this might be in 70 years. It's very possible that this is what he's thinking. And we don't know how God works, but it's very possible that God put forward the potential that when the Second Temple period begins, when the Jews return from Babylon, who knows? Maybe there would have been a potential for all of the land to be settled and a Messiah to come and it just be, forever, eternally wonderful. But we know from history that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. So when I look at this prophecy and I compare it to events that we know it from Ezekiel's time to today, I can safely say that the only time in our history, in Jewish history, that this prophecy has been fulfilled is today. Because today, we are, the Jewish people, in fact, residing throughout the mountains of Israel, from the Galilee, down into Samaria, down into Judea, and down into the Negev. And for the first time in centuries, the area is prospering. We have vegetation, we have agriculture, we have trees that are bearing fruit. And I love this verse because even as I drive around my own neighborhood, I just remember when we first came here, I don't know, 30-some years ago, I know what it looked like here. There
Right.
was nothing. Boulders, barren hills, no farms, no vegetation, no trees, okay? And today I drive around my neighborhood, just in my own garden. I have a lemon tree, I have 2 lemon trees, I have an orange tree, a clementine tree, 2 avocado trees, a mango tree. I mean, this is just in my garden, the trees that are bearing fruit. And as I drive around my whole community, I always see this. You see the flowers and you see the trees and you see the homes and you see the gardens and the schools and the shopping centers. Today, this prophecy is coming true like never before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is amazing. And we've referenced this, I think, before on previous podcasts, but we sat under those trees laden with fruit
Yes.
when we were there back in March. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing to see and to look out over the mountains. Now, I'm going to maybe put you on the spot here a little bit, Sondra, but this prophecy in particular, I believe that Ezekiel, and I was looking to try and find the verse, but I believe Ezekiel references in one of these texts in Ezekiel from sort of 34 on, the people of Israel coming back from the 4 corners of the earth. Am I correct about that?
Let's see, 4 corners. So you're saying that's in verse 34?
No, somewhere in this section of chapters. I can't find it at the moment, but
Yeah. Wait, I think I'm getting them. Yeah.
and if
Well,
I was
we have this. It says in verse 19, I scattered them among the nations, and they were dispersed through the countries.
yes, so
And
that's
then he's gathering them from those same places. He says in verse 22, let's see, here we go. In verse 23, I have sanctified my great name, which has been profaned among the nations. Yeah, here we go. 24, I will take you from among the nations and gather you from all the countries, and I will bring you back to your land. Yes.
okay. And I know there is another prophecy where God speaks to the people and says He's going to bring them back from the north, the south, the east, the west, the 4 quarters of the earth.
Right.
There's a couple of instances of those, and so I'm raising that to ask this: that you talk about the fact that this prophecy, it really can't just be about returning from exile in Babylon because of what hasn't happened until sort of modern times. So I think that's great clarification. And really, this prophecy then began to come to pass probably maybe 100 years or so ago. Is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, that makes sense with the beginning of the Zionist movement.
Yes.
So it's very interesting. There are a number of places where this kind of promise is made. For example, in Deuteronomy 30, I think is the first place that you'll see God promising to bring the nation, and there it's specified, from the four corners of the earth. And there's no question that during this time, the return from the exile in Babylon, that prophecy is not fulfilled, because they were only exiled to Babylon and Persia. Not like what's going on today, where they've come literally from all over the world. I like to say when I'm in Australia, they're even coming from Australia, which is the ends of the earth, And I like to ask people in Australia if they feel like they're really at the end of the earth. They don't. But put it this way, from the perspective of Israel, if we think Israel is the center of the world, then clearly Australia is at the end of the earth.
Very good. Well, I think that's really important, what we've just been talking about, because I think that this idea that the Jewish people scattered literally around the world. I mean, Europe, South America, U.S., Canada, parts of Asia and India and so on, Ethiopia. This is the return, I believe, that Ezekiel was talking about, and that's what you're saying as well. That, when God speaks to the mountains here, I like it. He speaks to the mountains, and then he says to the mountains, my people are going to come back. Kind of like, you need to be ready, because this is what's going to happen. And he's very clear. When I was reading, it says in verse 12 of chapter 36, I will cause people. But then he pauses and he says, my people to walk upon you, and they will possess you, and you will be their inheritance, and you will never again deprive them of their children. And so I think God is being very specific about this, his chosen people, the children of promise through the line of Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob. And it's really exciting to talk about these things, because, I preach on this text about the fact that God has a real connection to the physical land of Israel. What do you feel about that? Does God have a connection to the land of Israel? Why is it so important to him?
Oh, I think God has a connection to everything physical, and I think it's important to God because it's important to man. And I think that's something that's very important if you understand what the Bible is all about. On the one hand, the Bible is the Word of God, but on the other hand, it's the Word of God given to human beings. So, and it's very, very physical, the Bible. Beginning with the stories it tells us, to the commandments that it commands us, and things that are extremely physical. And I know there are Eastern religions, for example, that tend to create everything on a spiritual plane and ignore the physical. And there are traditions within Christianity that have tried to convert the physical into the spiritual. There are people who talk about the spiritual Jerusalem. Now, there may be a concept of a spiritual Jerusalem, but it does not replace a physical Jerusalem. It's an additional layer on the physical Jerusalem. And I think here in this prophecy and so many others, where God talks about the land. I mean, if you look in Deuteronomy, for example, in the covenant in Deuteronomy, at the end, 27, 28, the text of the covenant, God is talking about specific commandments that the nation of Israel has to obey, and the blessings they will receive if they obey them, and then the curses they will receive if they disobey them. Both the blessings and the curses are extremely rooted in the land. The land will prosper and yield its fruit and its crops to its people. That's a blessing. And the curse, there will be famine. The crops will fail. Foreign powers will conquer the land, and ultimately the nation of Israel will be dispersed from the land. And so you have throughout the Bible this idea that God has given the land of Israel to the nation of Israel. The ideal situation is when the land and the people are together, okay? But if there's a problem, God will separate the land from the people, and that is significant. And then in order to come back to a wholeness, the nation of Israel has to return to the land. And that is not just some example or metaphor for the relationship between God and human beings, or God and the nation of Israel. It is a physical reality.
Right.
The spiritual reality is contained within a physical reality, and you cannot deny that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you make that clarification because it's not one or the other. It can be both. There is a wonderful
Right.
picture there in metaphor, but you can't separate it from the physical reality of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And it is such a beautiful land. We are getting excited about going back there in just about a month or so. And I love to listen to you talk about where you live. And so you've shared a little bit about your neighborhood and about the trees and everything, but why is it so significant that you are living in Samaria, looking out over those beautiful mountains? And how does it make you feel, being a part of this biblical prophecy actually coming to pass?
Well, first of all, I'd like to go back to this same Ezekiel 36. Let's look a little bit at some of these, let's look at just one verse, for example. Verse
Sure.
10, I will settle a large population on you, the whole house of Israel. The towns shall be resettled and the ruined sites rebuilt. Okay, so how is this prophecy supposed to take place? Can you envision God taking whole cities and just dropping them down from the heavens? Is God going to just kind of beam
Hmm.
up, beam these people from Tel Aviv
Yeah.
to Samaria? No, that's not how it works. That's not ever how it works. God will present a prophecy. But unless that prophecy is completely and totally dependent only on a divine act, like if there's a prophecy, there will be an earthquake. Okay, well, that's purely divine. Now, human beings do not get at all involved in whether or not there's an earthquake. But in this kind of a prophecy, and there are many prophecies like that, there requires a partnership, if you will, between God and human beings.
Yeah.
And basically, what God does is he opens the doors, or he calls us, or he says, this is the right time. But if we don't walk through those doors and take part and do our part, then prophecy cannot be fulfilled.
Hmm.
It will eventually be fulfilled, but maybe our generation will have missed that opportunity and it will wait for another generation that hears that call. And this is how I view everything that's happened with Israel since the beginning of the Zionist movement, going back in the middle of the 19th century. There was a call, there was a sense that played in the hearts of people, of Jews, particularly in Europe, but also in some other places. And they said, that God is calling us back, and they start move things along. And of course, once the state of Israel is established, that's not a silent little call. That is a scream. You have to be deaf not to realize that God has created the opportunities for us to come back.
Right.
And Jews start coming back, and they're making Aliyah, and that's amazing. And then in 1967, with the Six-Day War, this part of the land, the center of the mountains of Israel, if you will, Judea and Samaria, comes into our hands. The whole settlement movement that I am a part of is a recognition that Ezekiel 36 places a responsibility upon us. When that liberation of the land of Judea and Samaria took place in 1967, very soon after, and then for the years since, this
Yeah.
movement has been pushed along by individuals, by
Right.
people of faith, Jews, who look at these verses and say, we have the responsibility. We can't wait for the government. We can't wait for negotiations. All of that, that's not what we need to be doing. We need to be pushing this along. And I can, with pride today, say that we are 500,000 Jews today living in Judea and Samaria. And this all began because there were a few people who heard this call, read these verses, and said, God is expecting us to act now and go settle the mountains of Israel, rebuild the cities, rebuild the ruins, and resettle the mountains. And that's what we do. And that's why it's so meaningful for me. Just an ordinary life, living in a house, sending my kids to school, going shopping. It's ordinary life, but it's part of fulfillment of this prophecy.
It's beautiful. Like I said, I love your passion and just listening to you talk about that and why it's so important. And I think it's important for others to hear that passion in your voice and as you share as well, because not everybody understands this, and this is a great opportunity for people to understand, to know that God has specifically prophesied that this will happen and that you as a group as a movement are simply partnering with God in seeing this come to pass. And we know that, God moves it along, and he does. I liked how you put it, God opens the doors and God sort of places the call, but we have to follow. And I think that's great advice for anybody who's listening today. And maybe you feel like God's asked you to do something, called you to do something, and you're just waiting for it to happen magically. It's probably not going to happen magically. You need to put in some effort. You need to do your part. And I just think that's a great perspective. Sondra, it's just always such a joy to have you on the podcast. We really appreciate you sharing with us today. And I want to make sure that people who are listening know about what it is that you do. So just remind our audience about CFOIC and the work, and how can they connect with you? How can we get involved in this fulfillment of prophecy?
Well, what we do, Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, was established in order to enable Christians to connect with the settlement movement, with the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, which, as we've seen, are fulfillment of prophecy. So in a way, if you're part of CFOIC, you yourself are also taking part in the fulfillment of prophecy. And I want to encourage people to sign up for our newsletter, to take a look at our website at cfoic.com. We also offer Christians the opportunity to support some of the work we're doing financially. We are actually physically making a difference in the lives of people here, whether it's providing vital security and emergency equipment, or helping people with needs, children with special needs, the elderly, needy families, just doing all kinds of things to strengthen the communities and make life in the communities that much easier. And it's all being done with the financial support of Christians. So if that's something that speaks to your heart, then definitely we welcome you. We want to hear from you. We also put out a lot of information. So just take a look at our website and send me an email. And I'd love to be in touch with you and answer your questions and help you get involved in the fulfillment of prophecy.
Well, thank you again, Sondra. Wonderful to have you on the show today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Perhaps we'll see you in Jerusalem in about a month or so.
That would be great. Looking forward.
Thanks for watching. You can listen to this entire podcast on your favorite audio podcast platform. Find the link below. And while you're at it, don't forget to click subscribe and follow us on Facebook so you can stay connected to First Century Foundations.